It began with a velvet jewelry case quietly carried through a private corridor inside Buckingham Palace. A case once believed destined for royal vaults, not for Catherine. But when whispers emerged that King Charles had personally approved Princess Catherine's inheritance of Queen Elizabeth II's legendary Cartier Brooch collection, the silence inside palace walls became impossible to contain. What looked like a simple gesture of trust soon revealed itself as something far more explosive. A final reshaping of royal power, legacy, and bloodline. At first, palace aides reportedly tried to dismiss the rumors as nothing more than exaggerated chatter leaking from private royal circles. But the problem with whispers inside the House of Windsor is that they rarely stay buried for long. Especially when they involve Queen Elizabeth II's personal collection pieces so historically symbolic that senior royal historians allegedly describe them as living artifacts of the crown itself. According to various palace insiders, the collection included some of the late Queen's most emotionally significant Cartier brooches, pieces worn during wartime commemorations, diplomatic receptions, coronation anniversaries, and moments of immense constitutional importance. These were never viewed as ordinary jewels. They were visual declarations of monarchy, continuity, endurance, and silent authority. Which is precisely why reports surrounding Catherine's sudden appointment as future custodian sent such shockwaves through the institution. Sources close to royal administrative circles now claim that King Charles approved the transfer discussions far faster than many senior courtiers expected. Some insiders reportedly believed the collection would remain indefinitely under broader royal stewardship, while others quietly assumed portions of it could eventually fall within Queen Camilla's ceremonial influence. But according to palace whispers, that expectation collapsed almost overnight after a sequence of highly private meetings between Charles, trusted constitutional advisors, and royal archivists. The speed of the decision allegedly stunned veteran palace staff who had spent decades navigating the monarchy's slow-moving traditions. One former royal observer even suggested that the urgency behind the move reflected something much larger than sentiment. It reflected preparation. That was the detail that truly unsettled royal circles because this inheritance was not being framed as fashion, glamour, or personal preference. It was being discussed internally, according to multiple reports, as an institutional transfer of symbolic authority. Catherine was not simply inheriting jewelry. She was inheriting visual continuity with Queen Elizabeth II herself. And for many within the monarchy, that distinction carried enormous weight, especially after Catherine was reportedly seen leaving a private audience with the king carrying red-bound briefing documents usually associated with ceremonial planning and archival succession reviews. Almost immediately, speculation intensified. Royal historians began revisiting stories from the late Queen's final years, quietly connecting Catherine's growing prominence to what some insiders now believe was a carefully structured long-term succession vision designed long before Elizabeth's death. As discussions deepened, attention turned toward which pieces might eventually pass directly into Catherine's possession. Palace commentators mentioned wartime sapphire brooches, coronation-era Cartier designs, and treasured pieces associated with the late Queen's most defining public appearances. The emotional symbolism attached to those items only fueled further speculation that this was not merely Charles making a personal decision, but rather fulfilling a direction deeply rooted in Queen Elizabeth's understanding of monarchy itself. Because inside royal circles, jewelry has always carried a language of its own. A language of hierarchy, of legitimacy, of trust. And now, according to insiders, Catherine was being handed the right to speak that language more clearly than anyone else of her generation. But the deeper truth wasn't about jewelry at all. It was about why Queen Elizabeth may have intended Catherine, and Catherine alone, to carry the visual language of the crown into the next royal era. Long before the headlines erupted, Queen Elizabeth II reportedly treated her Cartier brooch collection not as decoration, but as a coded archive of monarchy itself. Every sapphire, diamond, and platinum setting carried memories of war, coronations, funerals, jubilees, and constitutional duty. And now, according to royal insiders, that archive was quietly being entrusted to Catherine. For decades, the late Queen understood what many outside the palace never fully grasped. Royal jewels are never silent. They speak in moments when monarchs cannot. They remind the nation of endurance after grief, calm after scandal, unity after fracture. A brooch placed carefully on a coat could signal remembrance, loyalty, diplomacy, or warning without a single word being spoken. That was why Queen Elizabeth's Cartier pieces carried such extraordinary weight. They were not simply precious objects locked behind palace security. They were fragments of national memory, touched by history, guarded through crisis, and worn by a sovereign who knew that every public appearance formed part of a larger constitutional language. Reports suggest some of these pieces were linked, directly or symbolically, to royal moments stretching back generations. State ceremonies, solemn anniversaries, wartime commemorations, and jubilees all gave the collection a meaning far deeper than wealth. Palace experts have long claimed that Queen Elizabeth paid close attention to which royals understood this delicate visual protocol. Not who wore the largest jewel, not who attracted the loudest attention, but who understood restraint, who understood timing, who understood that monarchy survives not through spectacle, but through discipline. And increasingly, Catherine appeared to understand that language with almost unsettling precision. That is why her own use of symbolic jewelry began drawing quiet notice. Catherine did not wear history as a trophy. She wore it as responsibility. Each appearance seemed measured, careful, respectful of the women who had carried the crown before her. In a royal age often shaken by branding, controversy, interviews, and public emotional battles, Catherine's style became something different. It was not loud. It was not defiant. It did not demand center stage. It suggested continuity. And inside the palace, that mattered more than any headline could explain. According to palace sources, this was one reason Catherine was increasingly seen as the safest guardian of what some insiders called the monarchy's sacred royal imagery. The phrase may sound cold, but within royal life, imagery is power. It tells the public who belongs closest to the future. It separates temporary influence from lasting inheritance. And if Queen Elizabeth truly admired Catherine over many years, as reports suggest, it was not only because Catherine behaved correctly in public. It was because she waited. She learned. She absorbed humiliation, scrutiny, pressure, and expectation without turning every wound into a public grievance. That patience may have been the final test. Because to inherit a piece of Queen Elizabeth's Cartier legacy was not to receive a gift. It was to accept a burden. It meant stepping into the silent constitutional theater of monarchy, where every jewel becomes a message and every message becomes history. Catherine's rise may have looked graceful, almost effortless, to the outside world. But behind that calm surface was a long apprenticeship in restraint. And perhaps that was exactly what the late Queen had been watching all along. But while Catherine's rise appeared graceful on the surface, behind closed palace doors, the inheritance reportedly triggered anxiety, resentment, and a growing struggle over who truly represented the future of the monarchy. As whispers about the Cartier inheritance spread through royal residences from Clarence House to Kensington Palace, insiders claimed the atmosphere inside the monarchy shifted almost overnight. What should have been a ceremonial family matter suddenly became a silent palace battlefield. At first, the tension was quiet enough to be denied. No official statement, no public correction, no visible rupture. But according to reports circulating through royal circles, the decision to place Catherine at the center of Queen Elizabeth's Cartier legacy left certain households deeply unsettled. Some members of Camilla's circle allegedly felt sidelined, not because the jewels were merely expensive, but because they carried something far more dangerous: recognition. In monarchy, recognition is power. And when the late Queen's most symbolic pieces are linked to one woman, it sends a message no courtier can easily soften. Speculation quickly grew that broader access to Queen Elizabeth's personal jewelry archive had once been expected elsewhere. Certain royal households, insiders claim, believed the collection would remain flexible, shared, or at least available for ceremonial rotation. But the reported decision around Catherine appeared to narrow that future. Suddenly, the question was not who could borrow a brooch for an occasion. It was who had been chosen to carry the late Queen's image into history. That distinction changed everything. It turned diamonds into doctrine. It turned platinum into politics. And it turned Catherine's quiet rise into a direct challenge to every faction that had assumed influence could be inherited through proximity alone. Palace staff were allegedly instructed not to discuss the Cartier collection publicly, a level of silence that only made the story feel more explosive. When the palace refuses to speak, people listen harder. Royal commentators began describing Catherine as Elizabeth II's uncontested visual successor, a phrase that reportedly caused discomfort behind closed doors because it suggested something far beyond wardrobe or ceremony. It suggested legitimacy. It suggested that Catherine, through patience and restraint, had crossed a line others could not cross. She was no longer just the Princess of Wales waiting for the future. She was becoming the living bridge between the late Queen's reign and the monarchy still struggling to define itself after her death. Senior insiders also claim King Charles understood the public weight of this decision. With the crown facing years of strain, scandal, illness, and shifting loyalties, Catherine's image had become one of the institution's few stabilizing forces. Her popularity reportedly continued rising even as whispers of resentment spread inside the family. That contrast only sharpened the stakes. Outside, Catherine represented calm. Inside, her elevation stirred unease. Every archival review, every private inventory, every sealed note connected to the late Queen's jewelry reportedly intensified the feeling that the Cartier pieces were now more powerful than titles themselves. Because titles can be announced. Jewels can be interpreted. And interpretation is where royal power becomes dangerous. A brooch worn at the right moment can confirm what no statement dares to say. It can reveal who is trusted, who is fading, and who has been quietly chosen for the next age of the crown. That was why this inheritance reportedly became so politically charged. It was not about glamour. It was about succession by symbolism. And once Catherine stood at the center of that symbolism, every other royal figure had to measure themselves against the ghost of Queen Elizabeth's approval. But the true shock came when palace historians uncovered what Queen Elizabeth herself may have quietly arranged years before her death. According to various interpretations of palace archival planning, Queen Elizabeth II may have anticipated this exact moment long before the public ever imagined it. Hidden within private inventories, ceremonial notes, and carefully documented traditions was what some insiders now call a silent blueprint for the monarchy's survival. The idea was chilling because it suggested that Catherine's inheritance was not a sudden favor from King Charles, nor a simple act of personal kindness. It may have been the continuation of something older, quieter, and far more deliberate. Reports suggest the late Queen organized portions of her jewelry collection with future constitutional symbolism in mind, separating pieces not only by value, age, or sentiment, but by the role they would one day serve. Some brooches, insiders claim, were not meant for the present moment at all. They were preserved for the next chapter, for the woman who would eventually stand beside the future king, for the royal figure expected to carry the crown's image after. An era of grief, scandal, and uncertainty. That possibility unsettled the palace because it reframed everything. If certain Cartier brooches had indeed been marked for senior future queens rather than current spouses, then the inheritance was no longer a family arrangement. It was a message. A message about legitimacy. A message about endurance. A message about who Queen Elizabeth believed could protect the monarchy when her own voice was gone. Royal historians have long spoken of Elizabeth's deep concern about continuity after her reign, especially as the institution faced generational pressure and public doubt. She understood that the crown would not survive on birthright alone. It would survive through discipline, symbolism, and the careful placement of trust. And Catherine, according to palace observers, had earned that trust slowly. Not through force, not through public complaint, not through claiming wounds as weapons. She earned it by absorbing the brutal pressure of royal life and still appearing steady. During the Queen's final years, Catherine reportedly became one of the figures Elizabeth watched with increasing confidence. There were comparisons not of power, but of temperament. Catherine's restraint, her patience, her refusal to turn every private difficulty into a public battle. These qualities echoed the late Queen's own philosophy: duty first, emotion second, institution always. That was why the archival whispers became so powerful. Palace observers claim Elizabeth valued stability over proximity, and that single idea cut through the heart of the controversy. Being close to the throne was not the same as being trusted with its memory. Living inside the royal circle was not the same as understanding its burden. The Cartier pieces, if reserved with Catherine in mind, became a silent judgment on who represented continuity and who merely occupied space near power. As discussions grew, the old truth returned with force. Jewelry in the monarchy does not need to speak to command attention. A brooch worn at the correct moment can announce rank without a title, favor without a speech, succession without a document. It can elevate one woman while reducing another to the edge of the story. And if Queen Elizabeth truly left behind such a blueprint, then Catherine's inheritance was not just beautiful. It was devastating. It meant the late Queen's authority was still moving through the palace, shaping decisions from beyond the grave, and reminding every faction that legacy cannot be demanded. It must be entrusted. King Charles had spent months balancing loyalty, illness, public pressure, and the fragile unity of the crown. But insiders now claim that when the question of Queen Elizabeth's Cartier collection finally reached his desk, the king made a decision that stunned even veteran palace advisors. Catherine would inherit the legacy pieces tied most closely to the late queen's public identity. According to reports, the approval did not come as a careless signature or a sentimental gesture made in a private moment. It came through ceremonial transfer protocols, reviewed with the kind of precision reserved for matters that touch the crown's future. Palace officials allegedly viewed the move as an institutional necessity, not a family favor. That distinction mattered because Charles was not simply deciding who would one day wear diamonds and sapphires. He was deciding which woman would carry the public memory of Queen Elizabeth II into the next reign. And by doing so, he was quietly drawing a line through the entire royal household. For Charles, the burden was deeply personal. He was a son still living under the shadow of a mother whose reign defined modern monarchy. He was a king navigating illness, public expectation, and the delicate politics of a family still marked by fracture. Every decision now carried double weight, what it meant emotionally and what it meant historically. And insiders suggest that when he looked at the future, the answer became impossible to avoid. The monarchy had to be anchored around William and Catherine. Not because it was comfortable, not because it pleased every faction, but because public trust demanded stability. And Catherine had become one of the few figures capable of offering it. Some insiders interpret the move as Charles consolidating the monarchy around the Wales household. That interpretation sent quiet tremors through the palace because consolidation always creates winners and losers. It tells courtiers where influence is moving. It tells rival circles where access is shrinking. It tells the public who represents tomorrow. And in this case, the message was unmistakable. Catherine was no longer being treated merely as a future consort in waiting. She was being prepared as the visible guardian of continuity, the woman whose presence could link Elizabeth's vanished authority to William's coming reign. Catherine's popularity reportedly weighed heavily in the discussions. While the monarchy struggled through scandal, grief, and uncertainty, she remained one of its strongest emotional anchors. Royal commentators claimed the decision strengthened her image as future queen because it placed her inside the same symbolic tradition once carried by Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, and Queen Elizabeth II herself. In royal history, these transitions have never been only about bloodline. They are about presentation, discipline, memory, and the ability to make the crown appear unbroken even when private pain threatens to tear it apart. That may be why Charles's decision felt so explosive. It suggested that long-term stability now mattered more than short-term family sensitivities. It suggested that the late Queen's legacy could not be shared casually or diluted for comfort. It had to be protected, concentrated, and passed to the person most likely to preserve its meaning. And for Catherine, this was triumph wrapped in pressure. She had been elevated, but elevation inside the monarchy always comes with a cost. Every inherited jewel would become a test. Every appearance would be compared to the woman who wore them before. Every brooch would whisper Elizabeth's name before it ever said Catherine's. And as the royal world absorbed the meaning of Charles's decision, Catherine herself reportedly understood that inheriting the collection came with something far heavier than jewels. To the outside world they were dazzling brooches, but within palace walls they represented memory, sacrifice, endurance, and the invisible burden carried by every woman who stood beside the throne. And now that burden, according to royal insiders, was passing to Catherine. For Catherine, the reported inheritance was not a moment of easy triumph. It was an elevation wrapped in pressure, a gesture of trust that came with the weight of a lifetime. Queen Elizabeth's jewelry legacy was built on more than beauty. It carried sorrow, war, duty, family fracture, national mourning, and decades of disciplined public service. Every piece had survived private grief and public crisis. Every stone had witnessed moments when the monarchy had to appear calm, even when the people inside it were breaking. That is why insiders claim Catherine understood almost immediately that receiving these Cartier pieces meant accepting a role far heavier than admiration. The comparisons would be unavoidable. Whenever Catherine wore one of the late Queen's brooches, the public would not see only Catherine. They would remember Elizabeth. They would remember the long reign, the steady hand, the woman who became a symbol of endurance across generations. And that memory could strengthen Catherine, but it could also test her. Royal insiders suggest she was fully aware that every appearance would be measured against the past. Was she dignified enough? Restrained enough? Strong enough? Could she carry the emotional memory of the crown without looking as though she was reaching for it too quickly? In monarchy, even honor can become a trap if it is worn without humility. Palace staff were reportedly already preparing future ceremonial appearances around historic pieces, careful not to treat them as accessories but as constitutional signals. Royal historians often describe such jewelry as constitutional memory in visual form, because it allows the monarchy to speak without speeches. A brooch can connect one reign to another. It can soften a transition. It can reassure the public that though faces change, the institution remains unbroken. For Catherine, this meant stepping fully into the role of future queen long before a coronation. The jewels would not make her powerful. They would reveal the power already being placed around her. Public reaction, according to media insiders, focused overwhelmingly on continuity and dignity. At a time when celebrity culture rewards noise, confession, and spectacle, Catherine's reported inheritance seemed to offer something older and steadier. It reminded people that monarchy survives by resisting the urge to behave like fame. The Cartier collection became the opposite of a modern brand deal or public performance. It became a bridge between Elizabeth's reign and William's future monarchy, between grief and renewal, between the crown that had been lost and the crown still being shaped. And that was why the story cut so deeply. Because Catherine's rise was not being presented as a personal victory over others, but as a solemn passage into responsibility. The jewels were beautiful, yes. But beauty was the least important part. Their true value was in what they demanded: silence, patience, sacrifice, and the willingness to carry history without bending it toward ego. Catherine had been handed more than diamonds. She had been handed expectation. And inside the palace, expectation can be heavier than any crown. For years, Catherine was described as patient, careful, quiet, almost invisible by royal standards. Yet insiders now whisper that this was precisely why Queen Elizabeth trusted her. While others fought for attention, Catherine mastered something the monarchy values above all else: endurance without complaint. She did not enter royal life as someone born behind palace walls. She entered as an outsider, watched, judged, tested, and quietly measured against centuries of tradition. Every gesture was examined. Every silence was interpreted. Every mistake could have become a headline. But Catherine did not rush to prove herself. She learned. She adapted. She endured. And slowly, almost without the public noticing at first, the woman once treated as a cautious newcomer became one of the monarchy's most dependable figures. That is why the whispers around Queen Elizabeth's trust feel so powerful. The late queen understood duty not as noise, not as performance, but as discipline repeated day after day, even when the world is watching for weakness. Reports have long suggested that Elizabeth admired Catherine's restraint, her patience, and her ability to carry pressure without turning it into drama. In a family shaken by scandal, departures, accusations, and private wounds becoming public battles, Catherine became something rare: calm in the storm. Palace insiders now describe her as a stabilizing force during years when the crown seemed surrounded by chaos. While others pulled the institution into conflict, Catherine remained steady beside William, protecting the image of continuity when continuity itself felt fragile. And for King Charles, that steadiness allegedly matters more than ever. He is said to view William and Catherine as the monarchy's safest future. Not because they are the loudest, but because they represent survival without spectacle. This is where the Cartier inheritance becomes more than jewels. It becomes a symbol. A silent confirmation. A message wrapped in history, loyalty, and royal memory. To royal commentators, Catherine embodies the same principle Queen Elizabeth carried through crisis after crisis. Duty over spectacle, quiet endurance, controlled emotion, strength that does not need to shout. And now, public perception is shifting with striking force. Catherine is no longer merely William's wife or a future queen in waiting. To many, she has become the emotional center of the monarchy, the figure people look to when the institution needs grace, dignity, and reassurance. Her triumph was not sudden. It was built through years of restraint, sacrifice, and pressure few could survive without breaking. And as the palace settles into a fragile new balance, one haunting truth continues echoing through royal corridors louder than ever before. In the end, Queen Elizabeth, the second greatest inheritance may never have been a throne, a palace, or even a crown. It may have been the careful decision of who would carry her image, her discipline, and her silent understanding of monarchy into an uncertain future. And according to the whispers now consuming royal circles, she chose Catherine. The Cartier collection in this telling is not simply a treasure locked behind palace doors. It is continuity made visible. It is history placed carefully into the hands of a woman expected to protect more than diamonds. Every royal jewel carries memory, but these pieces carry something heavier, the quiet weight of approval, the sense that Elizabeth's long reign did not end without a plan for what came next. And that is why Charles's acceptance matters. His approval is being interpreted not merely as kindness toward Catherine, but as recognition of his mother's deeper vision. He may wear the crown now, but even kings inherit shadows. Elizabeth's influence still moves through the monarchy, shaping choices, protecting symbols, and reminding everyone that survival often depends on restraint. Catherine's role has therefore become larger than public appearances or future titles. She is being positioned as a guardian of royal tradition, a keeper of visual symbolism, and perhaps the one figure capable of carrying Elizabeth's silent language into the next chapter. Palace historians have long argued that royal jewelry is never only decoration. It can signal loyalty, rank, memory, and even quiet constitutional meaning. A brooch, a necklace, a tiara, each can speak without a single word being said. And as the monarchy increasingly centers around the Wales family, that symbolism grows more powerful. William and Catherine are no longer just waiting in the wings. They are becoming the emotional foundation of the crown's future. Around them, the institution is trying to rebuild trust, calm old wounds, and prove that the next generation can still command respect. Camilla's role, though significant, belongs to the present reign. Catherine's importance feels different. It stretches forward. It suggests tomorrow. It points toward a monarchy that must appear steady, disciplined, and deeply connected to the legacy Elizabeth left behind. That contrast is what makes the whispers so explosive, because the public understands what the palace rarely says aloud. The woman who wears Elizabeth's iconic pieces may also be carrying Elizabeth's unfinished mission. Now, fascination is growing around Catherine's future appearances. Every jewel will be examined. Every choice will be decoded. Every appearance may become a message about loyalty, inheritance, and the survival of the crown.